RNZ Pacific News. Atamari ko Susana Leata tēnei. Cases of dengue fever have been confirmed in Samoa. Acting Director General Tangaloa, Dr. Robert Thompson, says there is a presence of dengue fever, but the evidence does not suggest Samoa will experience an outbreak. Dr. Thompson says the hospital surveillance team is on the lookout for any new cases after 6 cases of dengue fever were confirmed for June, and the team has been seeing cases of symptoms including diarrhea, acute fever and rash. Dr. Thompson says dengue fever usually occurs after rain and flooding, and people need to watch out for mosquito breeding places. Meanwhile, Dr. Tangaloa says an average of 250 people a day are being diagnosed with the flu in Samoa, and this does not include people who have not been to the doctor or hospital in the past 3 weeks. Dr. Thompson says there are currently 3 influenza viruses circulating, plus COVID-19, and he expects a surge in cases once Samoa's border reopens to international travellers from August 1st. US Premier Dalton Tanialangi says Kiribati will be welcomed with open arms if it decides to recommit to the Pacific Islands Forum. After the nation's exit from the forum just before the summit in Fiji last week, the Premier hoped Kiribati would reflect and reconsider its decision for the next summit in the Cook Islands in a year. Premier Tangaloa didn't confirm whether or not he had spoken to the Kiribati President, Tanes Mamau, yet about the matter.
These things are fresh. Sometimes it takes time to sort of start to realize what their decision will be, all that. But as mentioned, there will always be the family of the forum, and the door is always open when they're ready to return.
US President Joe Biden says he's experiencing mild symptoms of COVID-19 after testing positive. Here's the ABC's Jade McMillan.
Joe Biden is isolating at the White House after returning a positive COVID result during routine screening. His doctor says he's got a runny nose, fatigue and an occasional dry cough, with the president posting to Twitter to insist he's feeling fine.
You get a lot of work done, going to continue to get it done.
The 79-year-old president is fully vaccinated and double boosted and has started taking the Paxlovid antiviral treatment.
Turkey says a deal has been reached to allow Ukraine to resume exports of grain through the Black Sea. According to diplomats, under the deal, Russia will agree to a truce while shipments move. US State Department spokesperson Ned Price says while the deal is a positive development, the US will be focusing on holding Russia accountable for implementing it.
We welcome any such agreement. We applaud the hard work of the UN Secretary General. We applaud the diligent work of our Turkish allies. This is something that not only the United States has called for, it is something that for which we were joined by other members of the G20, other members of the international community.
Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the UN are to sign the agreement in Istanbul later today. In Papua New Guinea, 18 people have been killed in a brutal massacre in Enga province near the closed Porjera mine. The local police commander, Acting Superintendent George Pakas, has told the Post-Courier he was left speechless when told about the murders. He says it appears to be the work of a deranged mob with no respect for the sanctity of life. Caretaker Prime Minister James Marape has now placed Porjera under an emergency status. He says more soldiers and police are being sent in, not just to Porjera, but also the other areas needing special assistance. The Post-Courier reports that of the 18 dead, 13 were men, 5 were women, all going about their normal lives when men armed with machetes and axes killed them. In Western Highlands Province, police are calling on those responsible to surrender after 4 people were shot dead and several others wounded in an ambush near the Upper Nebelia Bridge. Western Highlands Provincial Police Commander, Superintendent John Sagam, has condemned the killings, saying it was a first of its kind and the worst killing ever in the history of Tambul Nebelia District. Superintendent Sagam is appealing to all leaders and the community to work with police to ensure justice is served. He says the suspects are known and he's commended the relatives of those killed and wounded for not taking the law into their own hands. The government in the autonomous Papua New Guinea region of Bougainville wants to ensure landowners at Panguna that they agree and reconcile before the area is opened to development. There's been an agreement in principle reached by the Bougainville government and landowners for a reopening of the Panguna mine. But the Chief Secretary, Sadrak Himata, says the ABG wants to ensure the landowners around the mine are properly reconciled. The Bougainville Council of Churches led a dawn service at the Panguna mine pit last weekend, and later a Catholic Mass was held in the adjacent village of Guava to help foster reconciliation. A Fijian political leader is calling out the Australian and New Zealand governments for practicing the politics of convenience by failing to speak up on issues concerning democracy and human rights in the Pacific region. In a blog published by the Development Policy Centre of the National Federation Party leader, Biman Prasad, says the 2022 Pacific Island Leaders Forum in Suva ended with deafening silence from Prime Ministers Anthony Albanese and Jacinda Ardern. Professor Prasad says the region is facing a worsening situation in the standards of democracy, governance, human rights, media freedom, and freedom of speech issues. He says Mr. Albanese and Ms. Ardern could have taken the initiative and spoken out about these issues of their own accord, but he says they did not do that. Professor Prasad says this gives credibility to the claim that Australia and New Zealand are preoccupied with their own strategic interests first, before the interests of Pacific Island countries. Pope Francis has urged world leaders to heed what he calls the cries of anguish caused by climate change. He says global warming is causing the greatest harm to the poor and indigenous populations. The Pope says richer countries that have caused the most pollution over the past 2 centuries should give financial and technical support to those most burdened by its effects. In New Zealand, Auckland mayoral candidate Efeso Collins says a web address in his name that connects to the website of another candidate is underhanded and un-Kiwi. Anyone clicking on efesocollins.co.nz is taken to the website of one of Mr. Collins' rivals for the mayoralty, Leo Malloy. Mr. Collins says more people have been clicking on the address and being misdirected as his campaign ramps up. Leo Malloy denies any involvement in the politics, and Efeso Collins says he believes him. To sport, Tonga have all but secured qualification to the Netball World Cup after securing their 3rd win in the Oceania qualifying competition in Suva last night. The Tala scored a comfortable win over Papua New Guinea, 89-28, to follow up on their victories over Samoa and Fiji. Tonga are top of the table with 6 points, while 3 other teams all have 2 points after 1 win apiece. The Tala play their 4th and final game tonight against the Cook Islands. Meanwhile, in last night's other match, Samoa secured its first victory of the competition, beating the Cook Islands 54-35. The top 2 teams qualify for the World Cup finals being held in Cape Town, South Africa next year. Ian Foster is today expected to be confirmed as coach of the All Blacks. However, there could be changes within his staff, as Barry Guy reports.
Following the series loss to Ireland, Foster was forced to meet with New Zealand Rugby to discuss his future, and RNZ understands they've given him their backing. However, changes are likely to his backroom staff, with former Ireland coach Joe Schmidt, who was to become a selector, given a greater coaching role. That is likely to affect the current setup of John Plumtree, Greg Feek, Brad Moore and Scott McLeod. The Otago Daily Times is reporting that Sam Kane is set to lose the captaincy, with it being handed to Sam Whitelock for the Rugby Championship. The squad for that series is also expected to be named today, with few changes likely. However, a new lock should be added after Brodie Rotello broke his cheekbone against Ireland last weekend.
The Tall Blacks have booked themselves a Trans-Tasman semi-final at the Asia Cup in Jakarta. New Zealand will play Australia for a place in the final after beating South Korea 88-78 in their quarter-final overnight. Coach Peter Cameron says the players executed the plan.
We knew this was a big and tough task with the amount of size they have and the experienced bigs. So it's about accepting a challenge and having high expectation and driving our players to execute the blueprint. It was good to note our players very active
Jordan and Lebanon meet in the other semi-final. It's the news and sport from RNZ Pacific. Listen to and read more of our stories online at rnzi.com.
Hello, Mr. Wantok. Here comes Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. Coming up.
It is highly likely that we may have some electorates declared null and void.
Failed elections are likely for some PNG electorates as polling draws to a close.
They had quite a bit of destruction through their properties, and it's not going to be an overnight fix.
Great ocean waves wreak havoc in eastern Polynesia, and later on in the program,
when a Pacific woman goes to work, she will earn 75 cents in the dollar to a Pakeha man.
New Zealand government and business urged to address pay gap for Pacifica. Voting in the Papua New Guinea national elections is officially meant to end on Friday, but extensions in some electorates are likely. Don Wiseman spoke with RNZ Pacific's correspondent in Papua New Guinea, Scott Waide, to look at the latest developments, including the horrific murders of 18 people in a remote part of Enga province near the Porgera mine.
As far as we know, it was a conflict that's been seething for many, many years, a conflict between two clans, and that has spiraled out of control because apparently the leaders were waiting for the polling to end before they resumed their fighting. So the people who were killed were not people who were actually fighting, people who took part in the fighting. These were, from the pictures I've seen, a lot of women who were killed, a number of women killed within the church area. So it's that kind of violence that is very worrying for many people in Papua New Guinea. And a lot of people have become kind of used to seeing trouble in that part of the region. But large numbers of people killed in one go is still very, very upsetting.
I think the police commander said that these people, they had no respect for the sanctity of human life.
There was a similar case a few years ago in Tari where 16 women and children were killed. So it's on the border regions, you know, to Tari towards where the mine is, and that region is a hotspot where it's difficult to police because it's very mountainous, road access is difficult, and because the language and the culture, the clans are very closely related, the population is very migratory. They move from one location to another, and that's how the people who are involved in the fighting hide and continue to do this violence.
You mentioned earlier that this fighting at Enga and other events have not really been because of the election, but their impact on the election is going to be huge still, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, you're talking about large populations of people being displaced in some areas where polling hasn't even started yet or has started or about to start. So it's affecting elections in a big, big way, and it's also affecting, you know, the placement of security forces, because elections are a time where, you know, you move security forces from one location to another, and particularly in the Highlands, successive governments have chosen to do the Highlands first and then do other places. Security operations and polling in other places, because it's easier to go into the Highlands and then manage that particular area first and then polling in other areas. But for this one, with the exit of ballot papers and polling materials after polling has been done, you'd expect the exit of security forces as well, but security forces have had to remain in that area because the violence has escalated. That puts pressure on the strange resources that we already have.
Meantime, polling has continued in many areas without any trouble at all. Polling is meant to stop on Friday, isn't it? Is it going to be completed? Are they going to be able to stop, or will they have to extend?
No, from experience, they might have to extend for a day or two. Say, for example, in the Western Province, it's difficult to do a day's polling in the Western Province because it's such a far-flung area. You have to fly polling teams in. They have to take ballot boxes and walk for several kilometers before people actually start voting. There was an instance in the Gulf Province in the last 2 days where frustrated voters actually packed food in one of the ballot boxes and sent it back to polling officials because they said, you know, we haven't received any services in the last 5 years, so this is our statement, send it back to the polling teams because ballot boxes can come to our area, why can't services? So, you know, stories like this that keep coming up during elections. So yes, polling will most likely be extended in some areas.
We've had countless reports of ballot boxes going missing or ballot boxes being burnt. Are we going to have elections that are cancelled and then they go later to by-elections? Has there been any more progress on that?
It is highly likely that we may have some electorates declared null and void, or failed election, as they call it. And the police commissioner has also appealed for people to stop hijacking ballot boxes, stop the violence, appealed to them to stop the violence in certain areas. And he hasn't minced his words. He said that if this continues, Royal Papua Constabulary and him as commissioner will request to make a request to the Electoral Commission to declare certain electorates as elections have failed in those electorates and for them to go to a by-election. And the instances where ballot boxes have been hijacked, it's unprecedented, the number of instances that we've seen in this election. And people have acted with impunity and even recorded themselves doing all this nonsense.
Well, a week and a half ago, we heard that the Prime Minister, or the caretaker Prime Minister, James Marape, had been re-elected in his seat in Tari. We've got a few more results now. Many results so far?
Well, the incumbent Deputy Prime Minister, John Rosso in May, was declared about 2 days ago. So you've got two key positions in the former government that declared holders of the key positions, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. I am in Wewak now, and there's a Pangu delegation that's arrived in Wewak. All the accommodations booked out. They're holding camp here. And they will be here for at least a few weeks before the formation of government. And we can expect to see other candidates being quoted and being brought into the Wewak camp here to see if they can muster the numbers to form government in the next few weeks.
King tides and low depressions in eastern Polynesia over the last week have created freak waves that struck coastal communities across several island countries, causing flooding and damaging infrastructure. Most of the damage was reported in French Polynesia and the Cook Islands, with waves reported to be up to 6 meters high. Pino Punua reports.
General manager of the Maori Beach Club Resort in the Cook Islands, Liana Scott, says there's no widespread destruction, but the main beach resorts did sustain some extensive damage.
Probably the one resort that did suffer the most is one of the larger ones on the island, and they had quite a bit of destruction through their property. And it's not going to be an overnight fix. Everywhere else is kind of business as normal.
In French Polynesia, the damage was costly, estimated to be in the millions. Roads, port structures, homes, and resorts were damaged. Vice President of the territory, Jean-Christophe Boyosu, declared a state of natural disaster.
For those affected, the cost of the damage will be taken care of by the state's budget. In terms of housing, normally the state takes care of this. The community solidarity will help those in need, for example, of mattresses and refrigerators.
Meteorologists from around the region say there are a combination of reasons for the sudden surge in ocean swells. King tides caused by a full moon, in combination with a jet stream generated by a storm system in the South Pacific Ocean. National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research scientist in New Zealand, Conan Andrews, says,
so that's elevating the water levels, and that's causing the issues there. In the French Polynesia and the American Samoa is also getting hit by storm events. Same process is happening there. It's very long period swells resulting in wave setup coinciding with a high tide.
In Hawaii, high waves resulted in the closure of beaches across the island. Beachside homes were damaged and roads were cordoned off. Meteorologist Derek Rowe for Hawaii's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says the swells were the largest the island group experienced in 25 years.
We had a couple of instances where waves crashed ashore. Some of the larger set waves that came through crashed ashore, and some of the more prone areas that were lower Right now, our tides aren't really any different than we'd expect to see this time of year. It was just that period of extremely large swell where we had some impacts.
Another factor meteorologists say contributed to the freak event is sea level rising due to climate change. Conan Andrews says the gradually increasing elevation of sea levels are exacerbating ocean surges.
Visually, this is a very strong event that coincides with high tides, but with climate change, of course, that there is an increase in sea levels, and that will exacerbate the inundation hazard going forward.
The financial issues faced by the University of the South Pacific are expected to continue, with the Fiji government making no budget allocation to meet its debts to the institution. The government has also refused to pay its loan for the past 2 years because of a rift with the Vice-Chancellor, Al-Walia. But a man who worked for the USP for 14 years, economist Wadan Nasi, believes he has a solution. Don Wiseman spoke with Professor Nasi, who said the USP has been a significant example of the regionalism the Pacific Islands Forum is striving for.
It is a finest example, although it has now developed all kinds of cracks which everybody can see. But, when Pacific Island Forum people talk about unity and maintaining unity, the first thing they should be thinking about is maintaining unity on principle. Now, you've got 12 member countries of the university, out of whom 11 of them are paying their bill to USP for the students that are being taught at USP. And one of them unilaterally 2 years ago said, we're not going to pay our bill. We're going to take our loaf of bread from the shop. We're going to eat that loaf of bread, have our students, but we're not going to pay you what we owe. And annually they owe about $30 million according to the current funding arrangement. So my estimate is that by the end of this financial year, they will be owing USP $88 million, the burden of which is falling on the other 11 member countries and on parents and students who are paying privately. And of course, let's not forget that the donors, Australia and New Zealand, are now also funding something like 20% of USP's revenue.
Now, back in the 90s, you were the Director of Planning and Development at the USP, and you were looking at the figures. You came to some interesting conclusions.
Well, the big problem is that when the university first started, basically, there was no such thing as tuition fees and all that kind of stuff. So what has happened is that it's pretty much 80-90% of the university's revenue came from the government, which was divided up among them according to students and according to how much USP spent in their countries. But what has happened in the last 25-20 years is that tuition fees have become a much larger proportion of USP revenues. It's about 30% now. The donor funding has gone from 5% to about 20-25%, 29%. And government grants, what they call government grants, which is a real misnomer. They're not grants per se. They're actual payment for students being taught by USP has gone down to 21% now. So really, what is called government grants is not grants at all. They're actually payment by the Fiji government for all the students who are coming from Fiji, whether sponsored by the Fiji government or coming privately, and paying whatever fees are being charged by USP. So things have changed quite a lot, and there's a solution that is in front of the USP Council, if they've got the courage to grasp that solution.
It is. To do what?
Basically, what they need to do is to subsume what they call government grants, which are not really government grants. It amounts to only about $40 million a year. Only $40 million out of total USP revenue of $200 million. That $40 million can simply be subsumed into the tuition fees. So tuition fees will effectively increase by whatever amount is necessary to keep USP revenues at that figure. And what it will mean is that for the 11 member countries who are currently paying their bills to USP, it will make no difference, this change that I'm suggesting. But, of course, it will make a difference to one government. And if they then is from sending students to USP, but not paying USP what they owe USP for getting them taught, then USP will be able to say to the students, okay, go home, you're not going to be registered until you've paid the fees, which is what happens in every other university in Australia and New Zealand. And there is a long-term solution from there in front of the member countries, and they've got to bite the bullet and do it. Otherwise, what's happening, Don, and you can see it, Australia and New Zealand don't want to say anything to Fiji government because they've been neutralized by this China bogey. So then you're so friendly with the Fiji government, they don't want to speak harsh truth to them. And then you see what you see, of course, at the Marshall Islands, splitting away, Kiribati is splitting away. And this unity that they talk about, in the full secretariat. Not really, it's all a lot of hot air, to be honest.
Yes, but given that the majority of the students are Fijians,
yes,
and suddenly they found themselves having to pay far higher fees, is that going to dramatically reduce the student numbers of the USP?
No, it won't be far higher because it will be just to make up for the shortfalls that the Fiji government is currently not paying them. And just remember, the Fiji government thing is not, Kayu and Bainimarama paying, it's coming from the taxpayer. So, if the Fiji government still refuses to pay those, what it owes USP, then all that will happen is that then the amount will have to be raised from the students. And I doubt very much if too many of them are going to stay home because, at the end of the day, USP still provides incredible value for money for the kinds of degrees it produces. And these graduates are working all over the world, including Australia and New Zealand. And, USP produces these graduates at about, a quarter of the cost that Australian and New Zealand universities use them.
It has been for quite a long time, I think, through this debacle.
Yes.
Suggestions of the university or the main part of the university moving from Fiji. Is that feasible?
No, it's not feasible. They can have the Vice Chancellor moving to Samoa. It doesn't make any difference to the university. The fact of the matter is that, it's like a blooming fish cannery. You cite your cannery where the biggest supplies are. And, over the years, USP has tried to decentralize its facilities, like the School of Agriculture in Alapur, but it has stagnated for 30 years. The law school in Vanuatu hasn't done too badly, but even that law school, the first years of that law program are taught at the USP at Tonala, and they go there for the last year or so. And honestly, if you go and look at the origins of the students at Auckland University and Monash University, they come from all over the world. I'm going there because the university is providing a quality education and quality staff and quality facilities. So students are frequent to USP. And now that you've got a lot of other universities, there's NUS in Samoa, there's Solomon Islands University in Solomon, a lot of Pacific Island students can now shop around for better value for money. If the university doesn't offer them good value for money, they can go elsewhere. And that's how it should be.
Advocates for ending pay gaps for ethnic and minority groups in Aotearoa are reiterating their calls to the New Zealand government and business leaders to urgently address the shocking pay gap for Pacifica people. Founders of the Mind the Gap campaign say new data just released shows much of the pay gap for Pacifica men and women is likely due to racism or unconscious bias by employers. Campaign co-founder Joe Cribbs says this comes as no surprise in that many New Zealand businesses would be unaware that they are demonstrating bias in their workforce, and the best way to address that is to measure pay gaps. Kia ora and welcome on Pacific Waves, Joe. Just how bad is the pay gap for Pacifica?
Well, at the moment, when a Pacific woman goes to work, she will earn 75 cents in the dollar for Pakeha man, and for Pacifica man, that's 81 cents. And we can often think about that as numbers, we can think about it as statistics, but what it actually is actually about your ability to earn a good wage, free from discrimination, to be stable at work, and to be able to provide for your family. So that's what the pay gaps are. They're about the median woman and median man in the difference.
And then we're talking about for the same job, for the same qualifications coming in across the board, right?
Yeah, well, the way pay gaps are calculated, particularly the gender pay gap, there's different elements to it. But one piece of it is pay equity. So it's actually more in that if you are doing the same job as someone else, if someone says your colleague is sitting next to you, you should get paid the same amount. But we know that doesn't happen. It's illegal. We know that many organisations, and it isn't necessarily malice. So think about say you're doing administrative work in one division and somebody else is doing an administrative job in another division of an organisation. One division might have really highly paid people and end up being caught up and you end up getting paid more, and other people might have, the whole group might be paid less, and so you're not getting paid less, but yet you're doing the same job as someone else. So it's the pay equity, it's not okay and it's illegal. When we look at the gender pay gap, that's a bit more sophisticated analysis, and it basically takes in an organisation and it ranks everybody's pay and goes, where is the middleman and where is the middle woman, and compares it. And what that tells us then about that's not access to promotion, who is in the best paid job, who works there, and it gives us a much more sophisticated analysis about who is really having access to staff and has access to choices in an organisation. And that's why it's such an important discussion. It isn't only about being paid fairly for the same job. It's also about being able to access the same opportunities as your colleagues, to be promoted, to get overtime, to end up in the boss's seat. And that's what we want as well.
And how does New Zealand figure compared to other jurisdictions?
So for our overall gender pay gap, it's been around 10% for a couple of decades, so we kind of stuck. Now, 10% is a lot, and it hides all the differences. So 10% is everyone, but we know that the Pacific woman is more like 25%. When we compare us internationally, we look at Australia probably has a gap around 20, and through Europe it's probably all around 20, but I think what we should focus on is actually the detail, and start to break it down. And so the 10% really does hide all the difference, and that's what we want to really focus on. So if it's typical earning 75 cents on a $20 man's dollar, I mean that's the real revenue and really hits the road.
What's the cause here?
We know from international experience that one of the fastest ways to get some traction on pay gaps is to make them transparent. So that would mean organisations actually have to publish their efforts so that you know what Pacific women earn, what Māori women earn, European and Pākehā men and women earn. So that you do then see and choose the but also in order to have to publish them, organisations have to look, and I think government only what is happening in the organisation. When this happens, we know, if there is some legislation that makes pay gap reporting actually more, we'll probably see about a 20% drop in with respect to the gender pay gap. So that means the typical woman will earn, 20% of that gap more. We think that equates to somebody on a median income of about $35 a week. So there's a real gain here. This is about removing discrimination in pay, and that's generally what pay gaps are being driven by at the moment. It's what the recent research shows that was released this week after Pacific Earners shows the gender, what the research shows from the gender perspective. About discrimination and stereotypes and bias. If we can flush that all out by making it very transparent, one, we can choose what I work for, and two, organisations have to own up to it. And nobody wants to have a huge gap, and most of them will start addressing it. Which means we will actually see money in Pacifica pockets, because that's where most of the discrimination is.
Now, how responsive has the public sector been to these kind of calls in the past?
Yeah, great question. So at the moment, the public sector, the core public sector agencies have been publishing their gender pay gap, and this year, in the next few months, they're actually now going to also publish the equal one. So we will all be able to see a certificate pay gap for our core government agencies. Now I think it's amazing leadership, right? It's absolutely keeping us to the mark. We at Mind the Gap went to our business colleagues and said, we'll create a register, a place where you can report. And we've got upwards of 55 really big employers doing that. So there is business leaders here that know they get but the 2055, we think there should be about another 5,000 organisations that actually report. So that's what we're pushing for. So we have been advocating really strongly for the government on pay gap reporting to make it compulsory so that we see the benefits. And I don't know about you, but winter bikes, right, the cost of heating, the cost of food, like 3 minutes now really matters.
That brings us to the end of Pacific Waves for today. Remember, you can download us using a device from Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcast. And if you're using Apple, please leave us a rating so others can also find us. Thank you so much, and you can follow us next time. Everyone talk lo Melanese update ni Korean Hawking. So program today by me look lo sample of big stories around the region, and behind by me go lo team lo budget and lo Vanuatu. And the Pacific news ni Korean Hawking. Dari lo one family may stop under lo house arrest or kolom lo Timor lo Tokyo. Hemi because of the refusing COVID vaccinations, and been talk sorry lo elders for us for this one hemi being causing online. But hemi no vaccination, hemi still stop strong lo that vaccinations, but hemi no taken and my family bank too okay taken. Mr. Patelesio, wife Len and son Brian also been under lo this Timor or house arrest since August last year. And daughter Bota had been joining Okatalo December. But Ota confined to property of Sileva, Ota bought a sea for swimming for fishing, but Ota or family for local now or fishing for supplies. Ota wave shells were indicating 5 meters and it is expected in southern parts from overnight, but Hemi Northern Mountain, manager of the Cook Islands Tourism Australasia, going west. And he said not only one for reasonable high tide, no any damage from reported. And any business as usual for the tourism operators. Mr. Weston said most law really been affected. Also, Fijian economist Hemi said description law government law Fiji economic forecast was the highest ever. Hemi no stress with the tourism sector Hemi rebound after reopening the international border of law Fiji. Economy Hemi forecast will grow by 12.4% for coming year. During launch last week, law 2022-23 budget, the generalized study, and we've been describing this whole growth as the highest ever for Fiji. Senior economics law invested the South Pacific in Australia, and he said this description coming of straight from this GDP ratio is calculated from ratio for last year, and it's a time pandemic and it's part of forever. So time he the economy by figure by any high, and so now the economy will start back after he stop from pandemic. By me single people while warplanes for New Caledonia for joining now airport exercises for next month for Northern Australia. Planes and support the camp will be deployed for French military base from Salta for North Numea. About the partner exercise speech track been run by Australian Air Force out of bases of Darwin within Tyndall French participation in Indian Finnish maritime warming relations between Canberra and Paris. After hiatus over the decision, Australia last year for cancelling one for multi-billion-dollar submarine order. And for estimated 100 planes are expected to take part in this 3-week war games. New Caledonia reported that French Air Force planes by also involved the military and New Caledonia and Loyalty Islands. Reports law that Duncan Staff Party law Solomon Islands National Referral Hospital have been investigated by hospital management. Allegations have including people who have been making loud noises and also drink alcohol inside the senior nurse's office for emergency department. Referral Hospital Chief Executive George Malefwasi, and he said news that Barabat is leading to us. Emergency department held us for a meeting on for explanation on response to media reports. And he said its investigation and we find out allegations that have through disciplinary actions again. Nelson Tangalani may be arrived in Wellington and he meet with the New Zealand Prime Minister. And the first time in New Zealand Parliament and for new leaders where he had no complete Commonwealth Games where he joining now long ball teams. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern with Premier Nelson Tangalani has been signing for a new partnership agreement between the new way during bilateral meeting for signing. Premier Tangalani has been thanking Ardern for the great welcome, acknowledging of the ancestors for people, nations, everyone. Then he complimented Thailand for the ocean policies from US, successful taking COVID-19 out of communities, and he wishing him luck ahead of Commonwealth Games. And he did share two commitment to renewable energy, something we also been talk about during now Pacific Islands Forum. Efforts have been made for capital market development and for improving access to finance for the Papua New Guinea businesses. The security question within Asian Development Bank kata dia sama masalah memorandum of understanding for effect what I mean for one critically important reform initiative. MOU where we outline in now technical operational and policy cooperation may take place between by Pacific Private Sector Development Institute with the PNG Security Commission. And for strengthening now role of Commission, law capital market regulator, for capacity building measures and developing robust capital market strategy. Dahil for creating baik PNG capital market law for Muslim. The sports tournament has been outplaying PG Oceania Netball World Cup qualifiers has been win 59 points to 29 in Suva earlier this week. So he dominated from start and then he coached for one surprisingly large victory. PG coach Unai Fukaura and he's been emphasizing importance for maintaining possession. Cook Islands have been winning the opening game with a 66-48 win marker over Papua New Guinea. It is the second loss in the catalog tournament after first day defeat from Fiji. Top two sides of tournament but qualified for World Cup next year in South Africa. Solomon Islands has been naming largest ever Commonwealth Games team there with 19 athletes by any Golo Milligan, other complete law aquatics, athletics, beach volleyball, boxing, judo, table tennis, triathlon with weightlifting. Headed by Super Olympic weightlifter Jenny Winnie, who has been winning Solomon Islands' first Commonwealth Games medal, World Bronze for 2018. Former Olympic sprinter Francis Marioni will now chief the mission for the toilet team. And now, Houston Sports Pigeon from RNZ Pacific. And then now, Sample Okata top story for here today from RNZ Pacific. This time, joining now, team from Japan, Vanuatu.
In tonight's headlines,